to start with a little bit of a story before we dive. We're going to dive into consciousness, and I'm really excited. And I feel like there's so much that I want to say. But for context, I think we'll start with a little bit of a story. I'd mentioned on the show a little over a year ago, we were doing like a New Year's episode or an end of the year wrap up after 2022. And I'd mentioned that maybe one of the biggest things for me in that year is that I was almost like struggling with my identity in a sense and purpose, because I had been and still am a fitness coach professionally. I was also really starting to come to terms with understanding and accepting that everything is mental, and that our thoughts and our like level of consciousness is creating our reality. So it was challenging for me as I became more and more, say, like confident that it's more and more mental, and that the most important thing is what we believe about ourselves and how we see ourselves, and our perception of ourselves and of the world. And the more I leaned into that, the harder it was for me to kind of take exercise seriously. And I'm working with clients and giving them their workouts to do and helping them with their nutrition and the specific foods and all these things that are like external things. And I was like really challenged and like struggling, because like I'm going back and forth. I'm like, I've always believed that this stuff is really important. Now I'm starting to believe that this other stuff is way more important, and trying to like reconcile that. And I would say I've reconciled it much better. And I've really come to see the world in a way that they both make a lot of sense to me. And a big reason why or a big part of why I was able to do that, I think, is because I spent so much time, I was like studying and just like diving into consciousness and like the levels of consciousness, and specifically Dr. David Hawkins' work with consciousness. We mentioned in a previous show, like the book Power versus Force changed my life, and like kind of a lot of his subsequent books have continued to change my life and change the way that I see the world and really help me make sense of things. Because for a while I thought I was going crazy, and it was like really, really challenging to not like feel like I had these ideas I couldn't communicate because nobody else understood. And it was like, well, why doesn't everybody see this? Am I crazy for seeing the world this way? Like, am I just losing my mind? And is everybody else saying? And I've just kind of come to realize that no, I just kind of had a different perception and still have a different perception than most people I talk to, but that I'm very much okay with it and kind of excited about it. So that's what I want to dive into today, is this idea of the map of consciousness, which we've talked about before, but maybe today diving a little deeper and explaining it a little more, and then kind of making sense of why it's been so important to me. Yeah, and maybe let's tie in a little bit of why I believe holistic wellness is kind of the same thing as the evolution of consciousness, and how it makes sense in accordance to like kind of this scale and this idea.
Great.
That sound
Do
good to
it.
you? Yeah. An idea that's been really, really partially mind-blowing to me, and also very much put me at ease, is realizing that our level of consciousness and like our level of awareness, I'll use the word awareness here. I use them interchangeably, as I think we both do. Our awareness kind of determines how we see the world. It determines what we believe. It determines kind of how we see ourselves, how we carry ourselves. And what was really big for me to understand and realize is that this isn't an intellectual pursuit as far as like, it's not that one is right and another is wrong. It's not that you need to like study and learn a certain worldview. It's just, it's your perception of the world. Like your level of awareness completely changes everything. And maybe it'll just make sense to kind of go through the scale of consciousness, and that'll make sense that there's these different levels. And I did talk about this we talked about this in a recent podcast that might be interesting for people to reflect if they haven't looked at it. It was called Consciousness is the New Currency. But we'll dive a little bit deeper now. And yeah, let's just start at the bottom and work our way up. So Dr. Hawkins's scale is all the levels of basically the levels of awareness of our ego, which is also our levels of consciousness. So it's the different frequencies kind of all stacked on top of each other and different attractor fields. So there's like a level of life that is assigned with each level of frequency. And it's like our major, we all have a unique like frequency signature, but they all kind of fall into different scales or different levels on the scale, where there's a scale that already exists of different energies. So the higher the energy, the faster the frequency. So things that are vibrating at different levels aren't going to be in alignment with each other. So we might not even perceive the other things that are happening all around us at a different level of vibration. And they're all kind of stacked on top of each other. I feel like a good analogy for this is with animals, because we're all kind of aware that like cats perceive things in the room that humans don't. And dogs perceive things that humans don't, and also that cats don't, or cats, we all perceive things differently, different animals. And it's just based on the makeup of our brain and our senses. We tune in to a specific part of the spectrum. Like we can only see the color, a certain small percentage of colors on the spectrum of colors, but we know there's colors that exist that we can't perceive. It's just a weird thing to talk about. We know like the idea of like a dog whistle, where there's a sound that our ears can't perceive, but a dog can. There's also, we know we'll be sitting around watching TV and all of a sudden Eddie's, perked up and staring at something in the corner that we can't perceive anything, but he's really, really focused on it. I know like cats are the same way. We don't spend a lot of time around cats, but they'll do kind of the same thing, and they'll see things. They also sense things really quickly. That's why they're great hunters. They know that, if they're hunting a mouse, they know that mouse is going to move before that mouse moves. So they're able to react so quickly and catch a mouse that's really fast.
I think there's a big part of it and component in it that they're so tapped into the environment around them that they understand on a deeper level that they are all one thing.
Yes.
And so their perception and awareness is much greater, and they can pick up on subtle energies much faster.
Yeah, because they're in alignment with energies that are in the room that we just cannot perceive. Within the range of a human consciousness, the same kind of idea happens, where if you're at a specific level on the scale of consciousness, you're not going to be able to perceive concepts and ideas that are above that. Actually, I wrote down, there's a great quote from Peter Crone, where he said, like, you cannot choose beyond the limits of your current awareness. Which is
so good.
Exactly this. Yeah, it's like if you're only aware of certain things, those are your choices. So we like to think that our choices, which is like I think it, I'm very confident that our choices are what's determining our life, but we can only choose the things that we are aware of. So if you're at a really low level of consciousness, it's going to be hard to choose love. And it's going to be hard to choose like unity and peace, because all we know is lower levels. So like war is something that's prevalent in our society, has been for a very long time, because at a low level of consciousness, our only options to combat fear of somebody taking our stuff is to fight them, or like to I can't say that word, to defend ourselves. or to like go out and get things rather than just focus on peace and harmony and, oh, there's this neighboring tribe or this country. What do they need to sustain themselves and to be a better neighbor? How can we support, like, how could we in the United States support like Canada and Mexico so that those people are happier and can also contribute back? They would then contribute back to us and would have like North America would be a more harmonious, beautiful place, where now we have this like border crisis that everybody wants to be all up in arms about. And like, oh my God, these people are coming over our border into our land. And it's a weird thing where when you're stuck in this us versus them sort of level of consciousness, it's really hard to think, well, what could we do for them so that they don't need to do that? Because that's the only way you're going to change. It doesn't matter how big the wall is that you build. You're never going to stop the people wanting better for themselves until they have it. So hopefully that makes sense. I want to go through some of these levels and just kind of let's dig into some of them kind of along the way. But I think I just give some context to it. So if we start at the lowest level is shame. And for somebody who is living life at the level of shame consciousness.
Let me just say something before you jump into this, because for anybody who may still be new to consciousness, it can be a little bit intimidating if you're not even sure how this relates to you or what it means. But where we're beginning to go and what you're beginning to describe, the levels are also broken down into kind of subcategories for context and better understanding, which I know that you'll go through. But the levels, what helped me really understand the levels of consciousness, excuse me, is that they're basically feelings.
Yeah.
Feelings or emotions.
Yes. And
emotions are energy in motion. So that's when you kept talking about these are energies. Well, okay, what the F are energies too? Because these things aren't seen. So it's really hard, or can be really hard, and I just am saying this from personal experience, to grasp if you are a very intellectual person, which is what you were saying before. This isn't necessarily intellectual. So it's not something that can be, it has to be felt at a feeling or emotional level. So I would say that's the simplest way. Like, what are you feeling? How do you feel about life? How do you feel about your relationships to people, to things, to the world around you? How are you feeling in these moments?
Yeah.
And it took me a while to grasp that. That's kind of the easiest way I can break it down for anybody who's like, well, what the heck is consciousness? We're still trying to figure it out too, because these levels are pretty much universal. Like, you can feel sadness, like, that, like, someone dies, a pet dies, like a loss of a friendship, you're sad that something didn't work out. But then you also know what it feels like to be really happy, like something did work out, you got a new job, you're in a new relationship, like that. Those, when you said each of us have a unique kind of frequency signature, that's the individual. Like, your joy is different than my joy, but joy in and of itself, like, we have a basic understanding of what that feels like. It's just like, it's gonna feel a slightly different for me than it does for you, for my neighbor, for my aunt, but you have an idea. Like, you can put yourself into a situation that's like, oh yeah, that was so awesome, I felt so much joy and happiness in that moment. Yeah. You can also put yourself into a situation where you felt so much shame, which is what you're beginning. Like, this is the lowest level. Like, you are ashamed of either something you did or something that you do that you don't want anybody to see. That is a closed off, really horrible feeling. Yeah.
And it's like, it's very much, it's almost like, it's like shame around who you are more so than a certain thing.
Yes.
But yeah,
Yeah.
like you're not wrong there. I just mean like,
Well, because we identify ourselves with
yes, that's it. Yes.
so like
Mhm.
a good instance is money.
Yeah.
Like someone who doesn't have any money, like you're trying to you're so shameful of that part of you. You don't want to tell people like, oh no, I can't go out to dinner because I don't have any money. So you just make up an excuse.
Yeah.
You feel so ashamed that you're like, you know what, I actually have something that night, instead of actually saying, unfortunately, right now, finances aren't great. I can't go to dinner. Like you are so embarrassed, ashamed of yourself that
Mhm.
you can't even say that out loud. You come up with an excuse. And I've done this before.
Yeah.
That's why I know the feeling of shame in your body is really not a great feeling.
Yeah. So if that's the highest vibration that you're able to experience, that's your life. Is to always be wanting to like hide yourself, like your shame, or you don't even want to be seen. You don't want to leave your house or wherever you live. You don't want to interact with the world. You perceive the world as being miserable. The world is a miserable place, and I can't be a part of it. Um, this is a lot of serial killers or mass shootings and that kind of thing are people that are so ashamed of humans in general that it's like, I'm going to kill myself and I'm going to take as many people with me as I can. And I think that's even, shame might even be too low of an energy for that. But it's like that kind of idea of like, I wish I could
Mm,
kill myself and everybody with me
mm,
because this is so miserable. I want to end this misery. But you don't have the energy to take any action. It's that low of a feeling. So the next level up is the level of guilt. And at the level of guilt, you feel something different. It's terrible, but it's not shame. You just feel almost like you feel blame for something. You feel like you did something wrong and you need to make up for it. So there's going to be some level of action. So there's more energy at that level, more consciousness, so that you're able to take some sort of action, even if that action is just blaming other people for why you don't feel good. It's like, I want to pass the blame and get it off me. Where at the level of shame, you're like holding on to your shame. You're like, this is what I deserve. At guilt is a little bit more of like, get this off of me. And I'll mention the numbers too. Like shame is the level 200 or level 20, sorry, and guilt is at the level 30. And this is like a logarithmic scale. So there's lots of energy, and it's a huge difference from 20 to 30. And as we work up the scale to enlightenment, that's 700 to 1,000,
mhm.
is just exponentially so much more energy. But if you literally think of it as like your energy and your drive to take part in the world, at that level, you have at the level of guilt, you have a little bit more energy than you did at shame at the lower level, but not so much that you're going to go out and like make something of your life. At that point, you also see God as being vindictive. And it's like, so it's like a God who you need to like appease to. You need to like make sacrifices for, or like beg forgiveness from God because you want favors from God so that life will be a little bit better than the evil world that you see around you. Working up the scale from level 30 to level 50 is at apathy. So like apathy is at least you don't care, but you don't care. It's like the world is condemning. I mean, the world is hopeless. God is condemning. God will still punish you, but it's like, let him punish me. I don't have the energy for it. But it's better than living in guilt or living in shame. Work up to at 75 is grief, and grief sees the world as being tragic. And like there's an immense like sadness, but if you think about being really, really sad about something, that's more energy than being apathetic, or at the lower level
Mhm,
being guilty or
mhm.
shameful. Like you're not trying to hide anymore. You feel really bad. Like so you as we go through these, you can tell that, okay, these things have a little bit more energy to them. There's a little bit more life to each one of these emotions and each one of these worldviews.
Mhm.
Above grief is fear. That's where, like, you don't see the world as being tragic or hopeless or evil anymore, but it's scary out there. So at that
Which
level,
this is, I think, where a lot of
yeah,
people.
this is a very, I think, common place for people to get stuck. It's tied deeply to like anxiety. It's tied to just wanting to defend yourself and protect yourself because it's not safe to be yourself. And that's level 100. So that's significantly more, there's significantly more energy to that, but it's not necessarily like a nice way to live. Like living in fear is like terrible. And part of why there's, I'm just kind of thinking this as we go through, part of why there's not that much energy, like it's more energy than the others, but you don't have like a big like drive for life and like all this like ambition and excitement because you're focused so much on protecting yourself from the outside world. And there's this need to close yourself off and protect yourself.
And when you're saying you, it's like you're really describing the ego here. It's
Yes.
the ego's role.
Mhm.
The ego loves safety, familiarity. It also loves clinging on to any attachments that make
Mhm.
you revert back in and, hold yourself. Because I know we've mentioned it on the other podcast, but I do want to keep going back to like these, you fluctuate in and out of these.
Mhm.
Like you have to go through the levels of consciousness and become aware of these levels to understand them. That's why it's so important to, feel your feelings and feel your emotions so that you can better identify when you're, oh, wait a minute. Okay.
Mhm.
I've just dropped. I'm feeling really guilty right now for either saying something or doing something, or I'm guilty for, I am just feeling a lot of guilt for, it could just be a personal matter that you're going through. It doesn't even have to be involved with anybody else. Like, it's okay. Just because you went back down the scale doesn't mean that you can't get yourself back up. There is this fluctuation. But you're also not gonna jump from like shame to love. Like you have
Mhm.
to almost go through these and experience them and understand them, becoming aware of them. And I think
You are
right.
You're saying it great, and I think you made a bunch of really important points that I want to say. Like, first of all, I know I said it briefly in the beginning, but these are the stages of evolution for our ego. Our ego is like the filter that we experience the world through. So this does not mean anybody is better than anybody else. They're in levels based on the amount of energy that is flowing through you as you experience them and live at them. But it doesn't mean that if you're living at the level 200 and someone else is living at the level 75, that you're better than them in any way. And that becomes more clear, I believe, as you go through the levels and your awareness grows and you start to find empathy more so than judgment, and realizing, and this is sort of like why I want to talk about this so much, is like this changed my life so much, because when I'm trying to have conversations with people and I'm getting frustrated because they don't see the world the way that I do, it's like, oh, we're just at different levels of consciousness. I don't need to convince you of anything. I don't need to believe what you believe. You don't need to believe what I believe. It's just understanding that, hey, we're all in a different place.
Yeah, absolutely. And our ego is not, this is, from my opinion, a really big part of why we're here
Yeah.
in Earth School. Our ego is really needing to go through these stages of consciousness to transcend the prior ones and understand that, oh yeah, wait a minute, we are all one energy experiencing itself differently through the lens and perspective of the individual I or me. When I use the word me, I'm using that as the ego, really, the me personality that I've created.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to say that you kind of mentioned is like, you can also, so let's think of these, I think for the simplest way to think of it is like your default mode or your default level of emotion and feelings. And it's like, so you can feel something. So like, for example, like if you're living in guilt and this is really low energy, but somebody comes running into your bedroom at night with a chainsaw, you're going to jump out of bed and run away because the energy of fear will carry you through that moment because we have access to it all. We're just living at the other level. So it's like, not that if you've been fearful before, that doesn't mean that you're not living at the level of like apathy or guilt. It just means that you experience that emotion at one point. So we can have like aspects of ourself too. You can have aspects of ourself that are really high on this scale, while we also have aspects of ourself that are really low.
Yeah. I'd love to give an example.
I would love you to.
It's of you though.
Okay. This better be good.
Well, okay, we've talked about this on the podcast, so it's not going to be a new story. But when we were in Costa Rica, you went through a beautiful psilocybin ceremony. Mm-hmm. And a part of that was us sitting around the fire. And I was able to beautifully witness you having so many emotions all at once. Mm-hmm. You were hysterically laughing, hysterically crying, very content, where obviously your pupils were dilating, you were just staring, you were almost stoic in a sense. And then you were just like, even without laughing, you'd just be smiling. And I would love for you to chime in here, but watching you went through this spectrum of emotions and probably a lot of energies coming in all at once. And you probably felt, you described this, that you felt absolutely incredible. So much love and joy in those specific moments. Mm-hmm. But coming out of the ceremony, it's not like you were enlightened.
Right.
You didn't,
exactly.
You're not, I love you, but I don't think you're at the level 200, but you probably experienced some of that energy.
Yeah.
So just because you experience, like, now you know that it exists and that it's there. And that's such a huge pivotal paradigm shift for the energy that's in your body and the neural pathways of your brain. Because it's like, oh, okay, wait a minute. You unlocked something that was not there before, and now you've got access to it. It's just recognizing and becoming more aware of where the energies are that are on the lower end of the scale, and how those are predominantly lived day to day to day to day. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, that's actually, I wasn't thinking of that, but it's an amazing example.
Yeah, because I know that our listeners, or you guys, like, there are people out there who have been through incredible plant medicine ceremonies. Like, that opens a door to a different dimension where a lot of this energy and higher consciousness exists. But it's almost like our ego, for us to go from a shame level, like I said, we would burst. We wouldn't be able to handle that energy. It's like we have to acclimate and become accustomed to and integrate these energies to become more aware of them, so that we're really preparing ourselves on an energetic level. Yeah,
that's beautifully put. That's the work, right? That is spiritual development, which I think we'll come to in a little while. I want to touch on what you just said about like the mushroom ceremony, because there's a really, really good example that maybe I can clarify a little bit more of like what I went through. Not that you explained it well. You've heard me explain it enough, I think.
But yeah, no.
And you saw it. But this is what I was talking about before, and I was talking about cats and dogs are perceiving things that are there that we don't perceive. So if we look at this scale going all from level 20 all the way up to 1000, they're all here in this room with us right now. They're different frequencies. In the same way, I love this analogy that a radio works. If we had a radio in this room with an antenna, that antenna would pick up whichever frequency we turn the dial on the radio to. But every radio station is playing in this room right now. We just can't perceive it. So if you think of the radio, that's like our senses. And the turning the dial is using your senses to like narrow in and choose one frequency that is existing out of the many frequencies that are existing. So with a lot, or I don't know, I was gonna say with a lot of plant medicine, but my experiences with psilocybin, but my point is it opens you up to experience frequencies that you normally are closed off to. Because there's every frequency is here in this room right now. And our brain and our ego, like I said before, our ego is the filter that we experience the world through. So our brain and our ego are filtering out the ones that aren't relevant to what our ego wants to experience. So right now in this room, there is like joy and peace and love. And if my ego wants to focus on me feeling bad, it's not going to allow me to dial into those frequencies. It's going to keep my frequency at, grief or fear or wherever it wants to, because the ego is going to have a lot more control at the lower levels. So if your ego can trap you in a loop of fear, you will never realize that there's nothing to fear because you're stuck in that loop living through your ego. So when I would, like, during that ceremony, I experienced all the emotions at once. And what I realized is that I basically had the conscious ability to turn the dial. And I was able to choose in the moment, happiness, sadness, fear, apathy, joy, love. It was just all there. And I would just sit there and experience them all together. I was laughing uncontrollably while I was crying, while I was like unbelievably content, while I was scared, while I was sad, like all of these things at once. And then whenever I wanted to, I could just pick one. And I could just go and I could bounce in and out of, like, I was just turning the dial on the radio and like turn it up, turn it down, turn it up, turn it down. And it was like just realizing that these things are all available at one time. But it does come down to, like you were saying, like doing the work and like it's tuning your body to be able to tune into the higher frequencies that we would prefer to enjoy, rather than getting stuck on that loop of like the ego controlling us through a certain level of fear or whatever it is.
Yes, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I do want to mention, and we talk about this before, plant medicine is very powerful. I am an advocate for it. I think it can be very helpful, but you must do some energetic work, chakra work, meditation, getting yourself ready for these sacred ceremonies. Because if you're doing it not having a grasp on your ego and how that is a separate part of you, and that you are, an ego experiencing life, and there are different parts of you, because it can be a disaster if you don't have this level of awareness and you've done a lot of work, you've understood, like you're also welcoming this energy. It's coming from a place where you do want to learn and grow and understand, to be of service to yourself and others, so that you're going through these experiences so that you can help others. And as you raise your consciousness, you're helping others raise their consciousness. That's what it is. It's a domino effect. This is all energy. And like you're saying, it's all here now. The only time we have is the present moment. So when all of these frequencies, all of these energies, all of this consciousness exists in the here and now, when the majority of the world lives in fear, that's going to be the predominant consciousness. So this is how raising our consciousness is so important and imperative, that when I raise mine and you raise yours, then our neighbors have access to our energetic signals that are just talking. Like it's not, you can't see it, but this is why it's so important that to change the world, we've got to change ourselves. Of course, I want to go out and, stop racism, stop sexism, stop all of these things. But that's, if it's coming from a place of really, really guilty, shameful, fearful energy, it's not going to necessarily help. My intentions
Yeah.
might be as pure and from a loving sense if I think that, but if the energy that's dominating, the consciousness that's dominating is fear, it's not going to be as productive as or as I might think it to be. I have to change my energy first before.
Yeah,
It's
it's the
tough,
only
but it
thing.
has
That's
to.
the only thing you can do is work on yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's the example I used before of like war.
Mm,
And we always think, oh, like either we need to attack them before they attack us, or they attacked us, so we need to attack them back. And you have people say things like, the only way that we're going to have peace is like through war, or like we get this idea pitched to us from politicians that are like, these people are bad, they need to be stopped so we can have world peace. But like, what level of war is the right amount to create peace? Because it's like, it can't be too much, it can't be not, no, it's none. Because a little bit of war leads to more war, a lot of war leads to a lot more war. Like if you wipe out all these people, like they're going to, the next generation is going to grow up hating you and wanting, it's like the same thing. The only way to end war is to think in terms of how can we be more of a community and how can we help these people. Like there's countries in the world right now that want nothing more than to see America fail and like crumble. That's not because like we've been told like they hate our freedom or like these or because they're bad or because of their religion. It's because we've been over there exploiting them and stealing their resources and punishing them and putting in dictators that like work for us. And then when we're done with them, we just wipe them out and leave them in a terrible place. And it's awful. It's an awful thing. You can't do that. If we would actually just go out and help countries, the people there would like us, and they'd be in a place where they can take care of themselves without relying on us or relying on anybody. So they wouldn't feel the need to, when they're not being taken care of, go out and take resources from someone. It's like all the negativity just perpetuates more and more negativity. The only way to end war is just to love everybody. And the only way to do that is to work on ourselves. And if we had 8 billion people on the planet that just loved everybody, all there would be is love. But there's this idea that, well, if I love everybody, but they don't love me, they're going to hurt me. That's how our ego manipulates us, pulls us back into that loop of fear, where then we're working from a lower level and we're in this like survival mode of fear.
which is why we say it's so important to become aware of your thoughts.
Mhm.
Observe them, try to understand them. Where are they coming them? Ask, is this true? Like, do these people actually want to hurt me?
Right.
If it's a well, oh, yes, how do you know that? Did they tell you? Or if it's a no, oh no, I don't actually. Great. Where did that thought come from then? Is it even yours?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Awareness is key. That's conscious awareness. Because as your awareness grows, your consciousness goes. It can kind of you can kind of use them interchangeably. I know you do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also,
And we're also not saying anyone is bad for wanting the earth and the planet and wars to stop, like to go on
yeah.
not, of course, do what you feel is in your heart. That's right and correct. Dan and I are just speaking from our opinion here. Like this is simply
Yeah. But just in general, you can't force anybody to change. They can only change when they're ready to change, which is also like, I'll keep coming back to like, this is why like these books were so important for me. This is why it like helped me find so much peace within myself, is because I realized that I didn't need to change anybody else's mind in order for me to feel safe and comfortable, that I can just be me. And by being me, I become an example to other people who might think what I'm saying is interesting, might think, the way I carry myself is interesting. They might like being around me and be open to asking more questions, because then their awareness is like, oh, wait a second, there's something different. And then your perspective changes and you start asking different questions. As opposed to me trying to tell everybody, like what I was just saying about war, like that's a controversial statement. And if I were to go out and argue with people about war, and my response is war is bad, you can't do it, like just don't do it. It would be like, but they're gonna attack us if we don't attack them first. We need more bombs, more guns, more tanks, whatever. But if they're living at a level of fear, that makes sense to them. But they can't comprehend a level over that where it's like, oh, well, we are just one. And it's just probably a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. Like there's actually not a scarcity of resources. Like there's enough for everybody. We can all live. And but that idea is really hard to comprehend. If like I said before, that quote from Peter Crow, like you can't choose beyond the limits of your current awareness. So if world peace isn't an option, it's like, okay, well then what kind of war can we choose? And it's just like you're choosing. You hear it a lot with political elections where people are like, oh, well, I'm just going to go with the lesser of two evils, because they've been told you can choose this one or this one. And if neither of those things align with you, it's hard to choose something that does align if the option isn't presented. So I think we're getting to a point where people are realizing that system doesn't work. Like all these systems are changing because as a whole, our awareness and our evolution and consciousness is growing and evolving. So we're getting to a point where we're able to make new choices because we have awareness of those choices. So it's clearly happening and playing out. It's just sometimes hard to see if you don't have the eyes to see it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I want to just quickly say something. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I want to make a differentiation between right and wrong too.
Mm-hmm.
There really isn't right and wrong in these situations. There isn't a right consciousness level. There isn't a right awareness level.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a wrong. It's all for our learning and our growth. And I've been trying to, since we're working a lot on language and the power of words, what I'm trying to switch right and wrong to is higher, lower, because there are higher choices that I can make for myself that raise my consciousness, that raise my awareness, that raise these frequencies, that raises these emotions. And then there are lower choices that I may make. And that does drop me down in frequency. That does drop me down in sadness and grief. And it's not a bad thing. I chose that. This is the power of choice that we have, because then I know, all right, I'm choosing to be at a lower level right now, but it's okay. I want to go through this, experience it, feel it, and then transcend it. Then I know there's going to be a higher choice for me. You can use those words pretty interchangeably from right and wrong, because how bad does it make someone feel when you tell them they're wrong?
It's a great point.
Or even if you don't tell them, like, just the story in your head, oh, they did that wrong. They're so wrong. It's like, how can we reframe this dialogue, both externally and internally? They just made a lower choice there.
Just the idea of having right and wrong choices implies that there's two choices, and that like you're being judged by which one you make, essentially. I like Paul Chek teaches very similarly. You have optimal choices and suboptimal choices. And when you think about it in those terms, similar to like higher and lower, it allows you to think like, I'm not wrong. Oh, I made a suboptimal choice. I'll make a more optimal choice next time. But it also, I feel like, implies that there's a broader array of choices, which is empowering and doesn't like close you off and like lock you in this like polarity.
Which is the ego.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just going to say, the ego loves to keep you safe. So if you make a wrong quote wrong choice. He goes like, exactly, stay there, don't be different, don't do this, don't do that, like or you know, it will just, it traps you in
Yeah.
that lower vibrational feeling
Yeah.
when you're pegged as wrong.
Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing before we get back to the list and working our way back up the scale. Because I was saying before, like you can have aspects of yourself that are lower in consciousness, and sort of like this part, like maybe a certain chakra is locked at fear where the rest of you is higher, or they're all in different places. You can also, I think you mentioned before, like you can have like traumatic experiences and like emotions that are stored in your body. And if that's like trapped somewhere in your fascia, like it's there and it exists. It's all energy. That's what you're saying before. It's like this is all energy, and there's a part of it where we need to like feel and understand the energy and let it move through us. But if we don't do that and we're like repressing emotions and suppressing and like hiding parts of ourselves, and that is trapped in our body, we're constantly walking through this big field of energy, and there's all these thoughts and vibrations that are there. So as I was saying, like every one of these vibrations is in the room everywhere you go, or you know, it's all in the world. So you can just be walking along and you just walk right into an energy of fear that somebody left behind. Somebody was thinking fearful thoughts, and it's there. If you have fear trapped in your body, you're gonna like set it off. It's going to, because this exists for a reason. So our body can process those feelings and get them out, so that we don't create dis-ease in our system. We want a coherent system. So when you have like fear here and shame here, and like you have these different emotions, then you just going about your day walking through, and you feel them, and like your fear gets kind of lit up and like amplified, or like turned on. I'll say turned on is probably a good word for it. So then it's like, okay, I'm feeling fear out of nowhere for no reason. It doesn't mean you need to be fearful. It means like, oh, that's interesting. That's probably not mine, but what needs to move? What needs to come through me? And acknowledging that every thought that we experience isn't our own thought, and every emotion we experience is not like our emotion for a reason other than we need to like feel it and process it. But we also, like when we attach stories to feelings, then we also get trapped in this loop. So if there's like a thing that I'm scared of or fearful of in the back of my mind that I'm trying to ignore, and then all of a sudden I feel that I walked through an energy of fear that activated the fear that's trapped in my fascia, and now I'm experiencing fear. So I just grab my old fear story and pull it up to the front of my like frontal cortex, and that's what I think of. Then I'm going to assume that it was just the fear of this thing, and I'm not gonna deal with it in the same way, because I'll probably try to like push it down and ignore it, rather than just like, oh, this is all just interesting energies. Sit with it, feel it, work it out, and let it flow through you, and then we can create a more coherent system that has the ability to move up and not get trapped in lower energies. So the next level above fear is desire.
And we probably won't go through all of
No,
these.
I'll go a little faster. But like desire is just a good example of like, now you want something. So now it's starting to click probably a little bit more, that like desire is going to have more energy than fear, because fearful, you're protecting yourself. Desire, you're trying to get something. So desire is real, and we can think of these things as being like bad, like our desire, like we sometimes think of like our ego has all these desires, and it's like it is a low energy, but it's higher than the ones below it. So wanting things is a good motivator.
Yeah, you want good health, you want family, you want a house, you want a stable income, like that those are all part of the human experience.
Yes.
So we want to have, kind of like you're saying, a cohesive balance.
Yeah. And then like the almost like the shadow side of that would be like feeling like you desperately need things,
Yeah,
addiction, and like
cravings,
yeah,
like one-upping, like if someone else has it, I want it to be bigger and better. Like that's when it becomes out of
yeah. But it's like balanced desire is a motivator to get you going to want something more. This is one that I think is probably interesting to a lot of people. I find it a little bit interesting that above desire is anger. but if you think in terms of energy, that's why like it's not about good and bad. It's about this emotion, and this level of consciousness has more energy associated to it, because like when you have desire, like it's like, okay, I want that, but it's like, I'm angry, I'm gonna do something about it.
I bet if all of you who are listening can think of someone that I guarantee everyone has known, someone in an anger rage fit, how much energy does that
Yeah.
person have?
Yep.
The amount of energy that anger takes, like I have been in front of people, kids, like
Mhm.
a kid throwing like a temper tantrum. That is so much
Yeah.
anger and energy that's pent up there. And
Yeah.
it's that I think is a great example.
Mhm.
Like that is so much energy
Yeah.
coming
It's
forth in anger.
easy to, when you think of like a 2-year-old, that just like they have all this pent up anger, and or the pent up energy till they can't control themselves, and then they're on like the grocery store floor, like kicking and screaming because they didn't get the cereal that they want or whatever it is. And it's like that's anger personified, like
Yes.
embodied.
And it's not bad.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not like you can use your anger just like we can use our desire, as like, this is something like, I am angry with my state in the world. I need to go out and do something and accomplish something with my life. It's like there's a drive to it. It's just a matter, like, you don't want to get trapped at these levels. You want to transcend them. So it's like, once you use the anger to push you forward to start taking action,
Mhm.
then you want to try to move up the scale and experience higher levels of consciousness.
Yeah. And working through your anger helps dissolve it. There are certainly lots of people who are stuck in an
Mhm.
angry state and don't know how to almost release these trapped emotions. And that is how
Yeah.
it can become.
Yeah. And then a lot of, like, when you think of like the world view is like antagonistic. Like when you live in anger, you see the world as things that make you angry. You see God as being vengeful. And like, this is, when you talk about like almost the view of God, a good way of making sense of it is like, if you look at like the Old Testament, like a lot of these old stories about God are like a God that needed people to make sacrifices to them, and that they were going to punish people. Just the idea of like God, like bringing a flood because, oh, the people, they're not following the rules and we're going to wipe everybody out. Like those stories being told in that way are based on societies that had lower levels of consciousness that wrote these stories. So the way that they saw God is lower than the New Testament, where this is after Jesus had come, after the Buddha, after Jesus. Like the consciousness on the planet was higher when those stories were written versus the Old Testament was written. So the perspective is different. And then it's at that point, God is a little bit more loving and accepting. And it's not a perfect example, because I think some of the people that maybe wrote these stories, or the way these stories have been used in whatever, I don't want to get into the church much here, but so whatever you kind of think of the Christian church or the Bible, just thinking of it in terms of time and evolution, also in the sense of time, where in the older stories, God was mean, God wanted sacrifices, God was going to punish people. In the newer stories that were written by people in higher consciousness, God was more loving. After anger, the last of the lower nature, and I just want to kind of get through the lower ones, and then the kind of, there's a big moment here coming, but pride is the next step up above anger. And I was like, well, I'll come back to that in a minute, but like pride is obviously like, God is indifferent at that point. You see the world as being demanding, but it doesn't make you angry. It doesn't want to, the world isn't fearful, it doesn't want to make you punish you. It just is. But at that point, you're going to start to think of yourself as able to move and able to make choices that affect your life. Um, and then courage is the huge moment. So pride is at 175. At the level 200 is the level of courage. And this is a huge tipping point as far as human development. and moving out of like our lower nature, like animal survival instincts, and moving into more associated with like our higher self and our own divinity and growth. So at this point, at like the level 200, everything changes and everything becomes more like life affirming. Whereas now, like now that we went through all those little ones, like all the lower levels of consciousness, it's all very much like the world is happening to me. The world is scary. The world is bad. Bad things happen. God is bad. At the level 200, it's like you think of it almost as like a society where people's needs are met and they're able to start working on self-development and becoming um, more, becoming better, improving the world. Spiritual development kind of comes in at that point where everything else is just like, just worried about surviving. I'm just like stuck in my animal nature. I'm stuck in like that lower level of the ego. And then you kind of reach the level 200. For context, I believe right now, or as of pretty recently, the world is about 20% of people, maybe 21% are over the level of 200, and like 79-80% are below and trapped in that lower level. In the United States, it's closer to 50-50. It's actually 49 below 200 and 51 above. Which that I think that's tied into what I was saying about like people's needs are met. Like people living in the United States, not everybody obviously, but for the most part, it's a lot easier to have access to water and food and shelter and love than it is in like third world countries and places where they don't know. Like if you live somewhere where you don't know if you're going to have water that day or not, it's really hard to spend time working on yourself. So we have in the West and in the United States, like we have the luxury of being able to work on ourselves and evolve. So same idea, like we doesn't mean people in the United States are better or worse. It's the way Dr. Hawkins describes it, where we all are born into into the perfect situation to deal with our karma. And it's like we come in with certain things that we want to work on, and we'll be born into a situation that sets us up to work at that thing. And it's like we're all choosing. It doesn't like so it's not necessarily like linear in that sense where I could come in at a life, my next life being like significantly lower in consciousness than I am right now or higher. Like I don't know if that I think it or maybe I'd have access to get I'm not really sure exactly how it works because I don't know. But I just want to keep clarifying that it doesn't mean that anybody's better or worse. It just means it's where they are. As you say, at the level of courage, so like God is permitting. So level courage is 200, and that's where like this big switch happens. And if you think about it, like all those things were like negative outlooks, and then all of a sudden you have this outlook of like courage, where it's like it's not easy, but I can do it.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's almost like your head's now just slightly
Yeah.
over the water, and you can see a little bit more as opposed to like the muck of what's underneath.
Yeah. So like at 175 in pride, like God is indifferent, life is demanding, but I can achieve anyway. At courage is like God is permitting and life is feasible. And if I work on myself, there's potential for change. And this is really the first time where the idea of change comes into it and like taking responsibility for yourself. And that's when all of a sudden, when you start taking responsibility for yourself and your own life and being open to change and even seeking change, that's when it starts to speed up and our evolution can go faster and our awareness can grow much quicker because we're almost like we're pursuing it. Like I said, we have our needs are met and we have time to work on spiritual development.
Yeah. So that's just like too fast. You're like,
yes. Yeah.
Everything. The awareness is like, because once you see these things, you can't unsee them.
Yeah.
that's why I use the phrase beautiful destruction so much.
Hmm.
It's like, oh shit. All right. I very much recognize that I've done this, I've chose this for myself to
Hmm.
learn and grow through. You need to see these things play out at the lower levels of consciousness to understand them.
Yeah. Was when you can see it from a higher perspective, your view completely changes. And then so it's the idea of like a beautiful destruction, because when you're down in it, it's destruction. And that's chaos. That's your whole life being turned upside down. When you can look down on it from a higher perspective, it's like, oh, this is beautiful. All these things are changing, becoming something new. And I don't need to try to put the pieces back together. I can just see what comes next. And that's this like level of like acceptance and willingness that I'll mention in a second. But I was going to say, I love the analogy of if you live in like the valley, if you were like born in a valley, had never climbed the mountain,
Mhm.
you wouldn't believe the view from the mountaintop. Like if somebody comes down from the mountain and they're like, why do you live down in this valley?
Mhm.
Like, you're missing the whole view. Like I live on the mountaintop and you can see for forever. And you're like, no, no, no. I live down here in the valley and you can only see this far. You're blind. You're making it up. Like they wouldn't believe that there's this whole other world out there. They live in this really small myopic world where it's like, I'm just here down in this valley. This is my village. I can see that mountain. I can see that mountain. There's a river where we get our water. That's the world. But when you go to the top of the mountain, then you look out and you can see for hundreds and hundreds of miles. You know that there's so much more. You also know that there's more to life than that mountaintop, and that you can see other mountains in the distance. And it's like, wow, once you get to the mountaintop, you can see there's so much more to explore, so many other mountains, and you just go down and go up the next one. And like, there's so much more. Like that's the level 200 where it's like, oh, wow, there's so much more. I
Mm.
don't need to defend this little village in the valley
Mhm.
anymore. I can just let it go and experience the world. So as you start to work up above 200, they say it starts to go faster. And at the level 250 is neutrality, which doesn't necessarily sound exciting, but it's like when you're in that place and you're neutral, you're no longer caught up in polarity. So you're not gonna be like, oh, it's like Republicans versus Democrats, communists versus Catholic. Like it doesn't matter anymore. You understand that it's all the same thing. You understand that you're not just rearranging the mirror. You're not just being like, it's we're capitalists, no, we're communists, or turning a mirror and be like, no, Republicans, no, Democrats, and just changing it every 4 years. But when you look at the mirror, like your reflection is the same. We keep moving the mirror expecting to see a new reflection, but all it's showing us is who we are. So at the level like neutrality, you start to see things as they actually are and realize like, okay, it's just me out here. It's just my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, my level of consciousness being projected back to me in the world so that I can see things and face them and change and grow. At that level, it's like God is enabling and the world is satisfactory. Like you see things as like it's good. Like it's satisfactory. Like the world is fine. I don't need like everything doesn't need to be perfect because I'm neutral. I know I can just be me and it's all right. The next level up is willingness, which is like all is you can just embrace things. Like willingness, I feel like willingness and apathy are somewhat similar, but it's like completely different from an energy level. Where like apathy is like, oh, I don't care, why bother doing either. At willingness, it's like, well, which one do you want to do? I'm willing to do whichever you want and like embrace it and love it because I know that that's just life. So you're
Yeah,
not
and whether it
attached.
be go one way or the other, it's like the outcome's gonna be
Mhm.
perfect regardless.
Yeah, and you're just yeah, you can just like embrace it and make the most of it. So it's like we were talking about choices before, and it's like at that point you don't see a right and a wrong choice. You see two equal choices that I can enjoy and embrace. And then then it's like acceptance. And at acceptance, at the level 350, you can see things for what they are and like make peace with it. So there's even more energy here because you have like the energy to forgive yourself and others, which is really, really powerful because then you're not attached to all the other little bits of things and like that one aspect of shame or that one aspect of guilt, because you can then come to peace with what I said before, where like, you know that you couldn't choose to make because you didn't have the awareness. You couldn't have chosen something 5 years ago that you didn't know was available to you, so you can stop judging yourself for it, and you can accept life as it is. Things like when people say like it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it's like okay, it blew up in your face, and it wasn't the right choice, but it was the best one you could have made by your level of awareness. So it's like when you're at a lower level, maybe you'll beat yourself up for things that you didn't know you didn't know.
Yeah.
But when you're at the level of acceptance, and you it's a lot easier to
Yeah, I
accept.
think for me, this has been a challenge to become more aware of,
Mhm.
accepting yourself in all parts and pieces and aspects of you really is something that I think is a beautiful way to bring more self-love for yourself. Because when you have more self-love for yourself, you'll be able to love other people and accept them
Mhm.
for who they are.
Yeah.
And this really, I think, is shown in our relationship a lot because
Mhm.
we talk about all the time. And I say this to you, if we ever get into a little tip or something, or like you have a reaction, or you don't want to say or do something, I ask you, I say, are you thinking of something the old Elise would do? Because she did things at much
Mhm.
different and lower levels of consciousness. And you had the wrath of that, you saw that. So then it's like, how are you accepting that version of her and letting that version go instead of keeping that older version
Yeah.
in a story state that's in your mind? So I'm using the example of Dan and I, but this is any partnerships, friendships, parents, coworkers. It's that, like, people also only can know you to their level of consciousness too,
Mhm.
in some
Yeah.
way.
Exactly.
That's why the acceptance is, it's a big
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. And it's
No, I don't know if I'm there, but
no, and I would imagine like there's aspects that are and there's aspects that aren't, because I feel like anytime you have a shadow side or shadow aspects of yourself, you're not your default isn't acceptance, because like by definition, there's parts of you you're not accepting. So like I know there's still parts of me that aren't accepted. Like I know I'm not trying to worry about necessarily where I am on the list, but
oh no, I
I
know.
know I'm not here. Yeah. Um, but I think that there's something really powerful in getting into like these levels of like I think acceptance, and then as it goes up, I'll just read them from here and just to make sense of it. So acceptance is at 350, 400 is reason, 500 is love, 540 is joy, 600 is peace, and 700 to 1,000 is enlightenment. Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't even know if I can explain them at this point.
Yeah, we can try in
Uh,
another episode. Like you
yeah,
said, I feel like we have done, or you have done, a very good job of describing these
yeah, and
states from here.
yeah. I want to talk about a little bit. Like I kind of teased at the beginning, and I wanted to like tie in what I mean by like wellness,
Oh,
like
sure.
holistic wellness, because what I think of like what holistic wellness means, I think of wellness as our like overall state of well-being.
Hmm.
Holistic meaning like the whole picture. So these are both two words that mean like this overarching like whole thing.
Hmm.
Anything that we do that is truly life affirming is going to help everything else that we do. So, and you think about just from the aspect of like health and fitness and like my coaching, like coming back to my coaching that I talked about in the beginning, as much as I know everything is mental, I also know that if you're putting healthy foods into your body and like eating mindfully and not poisoning yourself, you're doing a good thing for your system, and that's going to help pay off in the whole progression of your life. Same as exercise. There's like a balance to these. So it's like if you're exercising and taking care of yourself physically so you can be stronger and more capable and move better and have less physical pain and less restrictions, and you're a more capable version of yourself, then you're able to do more. You're able to handle more. You're able to sit and meditate longer because you're stronger and you're more flexible and mobile. You're able to like walk further. So like so anything that's good for you is good for the whole system. If you're out of balance and you're like overtraining or under eating or overeating, if you're not training and not moving your body enough, you're creating dis-ease. And when you have dis-ease, you're going to have different, like there's going to be stagnant parts of your body. There's going to be different things that are trapped. Like I was talking, emotions get trapped in your fascia, but also not moving restricts and traps your fascia. And that is where this energy is flowing through. So I think that it is important to take care of your body physically, mentally, and spiritually so that you can allow for like a free flow of energy throughout your body so that you are able to ascend these levels and like embody them truly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, like, speaking from experience, and you as my coach, I'm certainly your first meet. I didn't know what consciousness was
Mhm.
until like 4 years ago, but I have been working out and eating and kind of on this wellness holistic journey for at least a decade now.
Mhm.
And that's what opened my awareness.
Yeah.
So yes, I had no idea about any of these levels, but the way I was moving, what I was eating, how I was eliminating a lot of toxic food and
Mhm.
just negativity opened up kind of, I guess, channels in my
Yeah.
body. Everything is energy. Thought forms are energy. Certain foods that we eat do have higher or lower
Yeah.
vibrational frequencies to them. So the higher choices of food that I was making was almost just cleaning my body out, making space for additional information to come in. So again, I started this journey, 10 years ago? Little by little by little, pieces of information will come in, right? We started
Mhm.
implementing meditation, started implementing different uh, steps for walking. We started implementing journaling.
Yeah.
It's as your energy increases, your awareness increases, then your life force energy, that chi within you increases. So you're willing and able and wanting to do more things like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not. It's a natural progression.
Yeah.
It's not like I was ever striving. Like I'm gonna become enlightened. Like no,
Right.
I didn't.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's just the natural progression of wanting to eh, be healthier, to feel better.
Yeah. And it's like the better you feel, the more you want to do things that also help you feel better.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah.
Yes. I well, because you used to say that all the time, and I used to say that too. Because we would tell our clients this, you don't realize how shitty you feel until you feel better. But when I said that years ago to clients, I was speaking mostly from a workout and food, like nutrition point.
Mhm.
This hits on a different level when you talk about energy, frequency, and consciousness. You don't
Mhm.
realize how bad or how low of a vibratory state you're in until you level up and can feel and become aware of something different.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful for paradigm shifts and life altering epiphanies.
Mhm.
It's it's indescribable until you experience it
Yeah.
yourself.
And
How do you put words into
yeah,
this?
that's what I'm really trying to do. And it's like, I don't think it does it justice, but it's like, it becomes more and more like self-sustaining. where like I've worked with so many clients where like you're saying, like it's really hard for them to get motivated, to get started, to stick with something. And I think like when you do view the world from like some of these lower levels, and you're more focused on like, no, I just need to survive. Like I'm not gonna waste my time working out. I don't care if it's organic. I'm just hungry. I want to eat something. But as you start eliminating like more toxins and eating higher quality food, like you said, food that has a higher life force energy to it, you start to feel better. And it's like, oh, what else can I eat that's going to make me feel better? How can I, filter my water better? How can I think better? And it like each one of these things, like I said, like it's not just when you start eating organic fruits and vegetables that you're going to want to eat better, but you're also going to want to live better. You're going to want to walk more. You're going to want to meditate. You're going to want to journal. You're going to want to contemplate these things. And as you take care of yourself, you don't have to actively seek higher consciousness. Your consciousness rises and you just kind of realize you're there. You realize that you're seeing things completely different. You realize that your perspective about, whether it was nutrition or exercise or, um, meditation or politics or whatever it is, your mindset around it and your awareness and your perspective is completely different. And it just like it literally is an evolution of consciousness, and we get to experience each of these stages as we grow through this life and by multiple lives.